Nobody that I know of has ever told me that there's a gold mine involved in this, and that is why we have in BC Indian land claims, because we refused to settle with the Indians because of the gold mines. And Custer's last stand was over gold.
And it's not only gold. I mean, it's the largest coal producer in Europe and a producer of chrome, I believe, as well,
yes,
and many other minerals.
This.
And the Nazis, during World War II, actually controlled the Trepčka mines and built their entire munitions empire to a great extent from those mines. But, you know, David, when you say, you know, someone came along and drew a line, it's really terribly problematic now to see that what was happening in 1912, 1913, when Russia, the so-called great powers, Russia and Britain and France and Germany, divided up Albanian lands, and it was only because of President Wilson, and this is Woodrow Wilson of the United States, which is one of the reasons why the Albanian population is very westward leaning. It was because of Wilson that the actual state of Albania was created. So 3.5 million Albanians end up inside the state of Albania, free in a sovereign state. And then 3.5 million were left outside in the areas that Joe has identified.
Now let's get that straight. When you refer to a state, we're referring to the sovereign nation type
of
state.
Albania. But then you have 2 million Albanians in Kosovo, or you did. We now know that we don't. Any longer due to mass expulsion and mass extermination.
But we hope they all go back.
Right.
Let's try and just play with some definitions here for a second, because I think it's sort of important for people out here in terms of where we are to think in terms of how big it is. I think Americans are being told that Kosovo is the size of Connecticut.
About, yes.
Right? So you're from New York, you drive across, there's Connecticut, right? Suddenly I'm in Connecticut.
Not particularly large.
Yeah. In Vancouver, if we take this lower mainland where you are and you look at the mountains and there's a U.S. border, my understanding is that it's about 20 miles south and 20 miles north of where we're sitting here and 100 miles that way, and we would cover the area. So to put it into the Vancouver audience, that's the size we're talking, and everything that's in this lower mainland is the size of Kosovo. Then we also have 2 million people in this area.
Correct.
Now, the Americans, I'm just going to play games with you for a second because you talked about drawing borders. And have you ever looked at the 49th, you know that the border between Canada is the 49th parallel, right? Except that here, it jogs down to take over Vancouver Island and a few islands. And if you come across the top of Minnesota, underneath Ontario, underneath Manitoba, we have the 49th parallel, and it suddenly does a little thing like that to take one island in Canada to make it part of the United States. Did you know that one? Take a look at the map. It's got a little thing that comes in to take one little island in Lake of the Woods in.
How did that happen?
Well, I don't know, but but we have all. And when I was in Stevensville, St. Stephen's, New Brunswick, and Calais, Maine this year, there's buildings that are built right physically on the border. So it's not unique. And Dr. Mel Dilley, who drove you here today,
yes,
he talks. He was born in 1942 in Kosovo, which was at that time Italian,
Prisoner.
and then 2 months later or something or other, or 9 months later, it became, what did it become?
It was occupied by the Italians.
Occupied by the Italians.
During the
Occupied by
war.
the Italians,
In fact, at that point, Kosovo and Albania were together for several years because of the occupation.
Yeah, that's right. It became Albania, and then it became Yugoslavia. So by the time he was 5 years old, he'd had sort of 3 citizenships. So
but the people never changed. They've been in the same
stayed
houses, same places, and when we refer to the nation, the Albanian nation, we refer to all those people because they have a common bond to the land. It's historic. They use the same language, and they have the same culture. My father was an ethnic Albanian whose people, my people you might say, fled the Ottomans in the year 1488 when they overran Albania. It was a great Albanian general, George Kastriati. The Turks called him Iskander Bey after Alexander the Great because they couldn't beat him for 26 years. He wore down these huge Turkish armies. At one time, even the Sultan came with 200,000 soldiers. He only had 10,000, but they couldn't beat him. But he wore them down after 26 years, so they couldn't go into Hungary, didn't get into Austria, and didn't go to Italy. He's a great general that has his statue in each one of the capitals, and many people don't remember him. But my father's people fled the Ottoman Turks in the year 1488. After he died, they couldn't be contained, and they came across the Straits of Otranto, which is only 60 miles. People don't realize it, that the western shore of Albania is only 60 miles at its closest point to the eastern shore of Italy. And you can imagine 500 years ago or more the rafts that the people took to come there. Well, my father spoke Albanian till he died. 500 years later, he still maintained the Albanian culture in Italy because his village, and there are 51, believe it or not, Albanian villages in southern Italy where they speak Albanian before they speak Italian, and that's 500 years later. Amazing story.
So the people have stayed together.
Well, and also Joe is describing one part of the diaspora. I mean, there are 15 million Albanians in the world. Dr. Maldieli is responsible for our visit to Vancouver, as you mentioned, and we met him at an international conference on Kosovo that was held in the capital of Albania, Tirana, 2 months ago. And it was a fabulous conference
before the
because
bombing started.
Before the bombing started, and it brought together Albanians from the diaspora who were concerned about achieving independence for Kosovo and who understood what we call the Albanian national question, the unresolved national question in the Balkans. Ever since Slobodan Milosevic began his first invasion of Kosovo and then marched into Slovenia and began one war, then into Croatia, another war, into Bosnia, another war with absolutely tragic, horrific consequences, now into Kosovo. What the world has missed in the process of this genocidal campaign is that all of the former constituent elements, of the former Yugoslavia, I should say, the 8 constituent elements, all became independent except for Kosovo and Vojvodina. And until Kosovo does become free, what is called the unresolved Albanian national question will persist, and there will be no just or lasting peace in the Balkans.
It will always be there because there's going to be ethnic. Now let's get into this ethnic Albanian thing, because there's a real common feeling, certainly here, and I think of watching CNN and watching the different things, because we've got, I mean, it's a marvelous world. We can look at the internet and see things and different opinions and different stuff. There's still a misconception that it's the Slavs kicking out Muslims, and that's not true. I get the idea you're likely Catholic. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
But Albanians share 3 religions.
Well,
religion is not a problem.
There's Greek Orthodox, which is about 20%.
It's Albanian Orthodox, actually.
Okay.
They use the Albanian language, but Greece kind of, for their own reasons, claims that anyone who's Orthodox in southern Albania is Greek. But that's not true. There are 58,000 by the count of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, I guess, was
Correct.
Max van der Stoel.
Max van der Stoel, yeah.
58,000 actual Greeks minority in southern Albania, but there's approximately 400,000 Albanian Orthodox. If you looked at the whole nation of 7 million, approximately 2/3 are Muslim and 1/3 are Christian. Of the 1/3 that are Christian, 2/3 are Eastern Orthodox, 1/3 Catholic. But religion has never been an issue with Albanians. They intermarry. They have a great tolerance. In fact, one of the books that we handed out last night was a book that shows that every Jew who made it to Albania during World War II was saved. It's the only nation in Europe that can say that. The 2,000 Jews that were there, and many of them were there since the time of the Spanish Inquisition, believe it or not. They sought refuge there and in Turkey. And the Jews that made it over, 2,000, so a total of 4,000, not one was given up to the Nazis. In that book, there are heroic stories of Muslim women, Muslim Albanian women, who put Jewish men in their beds as the Nazis came by looking for them. So here's a tolerant people that are being smeared by Slobodan Milosevic's disinformation campaign as fundamentalists, and he calls the KLA terrorists. This is not the tradition of the Albanian people. And the reason why Shirley and I feel that it's important for us to get around is to say more about who these people are, so that the settlement of this is based on the facts and not the demagoguery or the misinformation of the last Stalinist communist regime in Europe. And really, that's what this is all about. It's not ethnic. It's not religious. It's not historic. That's what Milosevic wants you to think it is, so you stay away, let us settle our own accounts. We've been doing this for centuries. That's nonsense. This is political. He walked into Kosovo in 1989 and took away all of its autonomy. It had its own parliament, own police force, own judiciary. Everything was separate because it was the Albanians, after the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, that were the first to throw their Communist Party cards into a bonfire on a hillside, 700,000 of them. And this man wanted to control everything. That's why he tried to contain Slovenia and Croatia and Bosnia. So politics has a lot to do with this. And now that we see he is a war criminal, why is anybody willing to deal with him? The Albanians certainly could never deal with him. So any peace proposal that's based with the presence of Slobodan Milosevic's regime will never succeed. There's nothing wrong with the Serbian people. They're good people, just like the German people. They've been poisoned by a controlled press.
By the leader.
Exactly, by the leader. And that has to be dealt with. So hopefully Mr. Milosevic will be indicted in The Hague and taken away, because that's what he deserves.
Okay. You had 400 people turn out last night for your
It was a wonderful experience.
Wonderful.
You have to be proud of Vancouver and British Columbia, because we saw last night a phenomenon that we hadn't seen in any city that we've been in, where the entire community, and it's a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious community that you have here, came out and collectively celebrated, in a sense, the humanitarian purpose of doing something, of each one saying that we need to take responsibility in some way for what is going on in the Balkans. And it was just a wonderful coincidence that we had 14 refugees on the plane. I didn't know this, coming from Toronto.
Yes.
That's right.
And they recognized me because I had been in Pristina several times. So it was, for me, a great experience. And there they were at the dinner with their family, the Shala family.
They did manage,
Yes,
they did manage
because
to
the
see them.
brothers who met them, they had
Well,
relatives
they
here.
brought them in. They brought them in.
Well, they were
on the
hooked up, I guess,
vacation.
priests.
Right.
Yeah, and they were there, the Shala family, and one of the brothers, we spoke English with him, and he said, oh, we'll bring them to the dinner. And it was wonderful that here we are having a dinner to help the refugees in a financial way, and we have the physical presence of 14 of them, the first ones
And
landing.
they were the ones that came into Vancouver, but
Yes.
they've
Yes.
not come in as part of the airlifts and so on. They've come in, as I believe, as they not is because the family had already petitioned them.
Well,
but
this
it's-
is a pre-screening.
That's
They're
right.
giving preference to those who have families in the United States.
And they were coming from the Macedonian refugee camp, so they came from the Blace camp.
That's right. They were in their camp for
Yes.
a long time before they managed to get here. Because this is something that's happening. We've had a tremendous Serbian, pro-Serbian demonstrations down at the courthouse here. Not violence, but a whole bunch of people. And I can understand. I mean, who wants their country bombed and who wants that happening? Where do you stand in the NATO bombing? Are you for, against? Is it even a fair question? Nobody can be for it.
Well, no one, of course, can be
it's-
happy about
that's
bombing,
right.
and no one can be happy about the loss of life. But, you know, you asked about religion. Race is definitely an issue here. Slobodan Milosevic built his entire rise to power on a platform of anti-Albanian racism, and there has been a tremendous history of anti-Albanian racism in the Balkans, because Albanians are the original indigenous people of the Balkans, the Illyrians. And they have a different alphabet, different culture, different language, different history. And now that the bombing is happening, even though people are sad about the loss of life, it is the first time in history, in 100 years, that anyone in the international community has come forward on behalf of Albanian lives, to save Albanian lives in the face of this genocide. So there's no Albanian or person connected as I am, a non-Albanian, with this experience, who does not feel that the bombing must continue. Why? Because if we allow Slobodan Milosevic, a genocidal war criminal, to continue, we will have deceived ourselves tremendously.
Well,
he
the
is
wor-
not finished. He will finish in Kosovo, where he has expelled over 600,000 people. There are 800,000 people trapped inside without food and water, many of them the subject of torture, summary execution. He will next invade Montenegro. He will not stop until he is stopped.
And we didn't stop Hitler when we could have.
That's the point.
Exactly. And we waited too many years. My husband was on the forefront. He brought this issue to the U.S. Congress in 1986. We know for a fact that our own intelligence community in the United States has known since 1986, and yet we pursued a policy of containment and appeasement. Somehow, if we had to let all of Kosovo burn, it would, you know, not spread beyond the borders of Kosovo
Well, in
and Serbia.
In '89, he took away all the rights. You're talking about the boats
Everything.
and everything that we've now
And
just,
jobs.
And
that
jobs.
we've just given back to Scotland, because they've just won home rule again.
Exactly.
But they also meant took Albanian people out of the schools. If you were studying medicine,
Right.
if you were studying law, if you were
And banned
studying
Albanian language.
they were not
training.
allowed. I mean,
They created an apartheid where 5% of the population, the Serbs, controlled 92%, the Albanians, the difference being other minorities like Turks. You know, Shirley make the point, and it has to be, I think, appreciated to understand what's going on. And I waved a memo last night at the dinner called The Expulsion of the Albanians. It was dated March 1937, presented in Belgrade by a prominent Serb academician, Vaso Tribulovic, 20 pages showing how they would expel and exterminate the Albanian people. 2 years before Goering wrote the memo to Hitler on the final solution of the Jews, we have a 20-page memo spelling point by point how we will influence, trick, buy, kill, and that if nothing else works, we will burn down their villages. This is what Milosevic is reading, and before Tribulovic died, Milosevic honored him. So we have the direct connection to ethnic cleansing, to a genocidal plan that's being carried out. So we have no hesitation using the word genocide, but we criticize our State Department for not using that word because they're afraid to take responsibility under the Genocide Convention that we signed in 1948. Because if you use the word genocide instead of horrific crimes, as our Secretary of Defense wants to use, then you have to, as a United Nations participant, do something. And they're not doing something. Everybody is looking for some political solution to just pass it on to the next administration. This is the worst of politics. If we're going to solve this one, and if we're going to get long-term peace and stability in the Balkans, which is in the vital interest of the United States, Canada, and the world, then you must do the right thing once and for all. Get rid of Slobodan Milosevic, give Kosovo the independence that it deserves. It sought that in a referendum in 1991. They gave it to Slovenia, gave it to Croatia, gave it to Bosnia, Macedonia, but they put aside, the Badminton Commission put it aside. In today's Vancouver National Post, I think it is, Noel Malcolm, the Englishman who wrote the book Kosovo, The Short History, in today's paper has an editorial which says the only solution is the independence of Kosovo. I couldn't believe it as I'm sitting in your green room, I'm reading this. But I say that because I'd love to see Canadians, people here in Vancouver, pick that up and read it. It makes a very cogent case as to why we should arm the Kosovo Liberation Army, and we must give Kosovo its independence if you want to see peace and stability in the Balkans.
Let me just ask, Mel Dilly, of course, I'm not sure, Peter Helm, do we have Mel's phone number here that we can put up on a graphic? Don't know that we do. Maybe somebody could get it from him. I know he's out there. Let's get the number, because I don't have it here and I didn't bring it with me either. Let's get Mel's number and get it up on the screen someplace. If Mel's in the green room, walk around and come into the studio. We'll make it real television and we'll let them know that it's live. This is what we're doing.
That's great. Well, one of the things we can do, by the way, is make available to those who call Mel this memo, Expulsion of the Albanians.
We got it. Thank you, Mel. Perfect. Got it. Okay, if somebody wants to get hold of Mel Dilly, who is past president of the Bosnian Association here, 876-2313, if you want to help out with this rather horrendous situation. 876-2313. My eyesight is going. 876-2313 is Dr. Mel Dilly's number.
Mel has both Albanian and Bosnian roots, and it was just beautiful last night to see the Bosnian community, the leaders there. In fact, we'll be having dinner with Abid and his wife, Mirza Kuric, tonight. Yesterday we met with the Ismaili population at their wonderful home at the mosque.
Well, that's why you're here, because Farouk Verji knew that my next door neighbor, Nordin Nielani, is Ismaili, so he phoned Nordin to get my home phone number at 10 o'clock last night so they could get it and we could do this show. I want to thank you for coming, and I want to just make one more reference. Apparently there is some sort of negotiated thing that's taken place now where they're going to try and give free rule. They're going to do some sort of security force. They want NATO out of it, but they'll let 30% United Nations, 30% Slavic.
It's extremely troubling, because you can't have autonomy under genocide, under conditions of genocide. It's impossible. Independence is the only way. And how can you have unarmed observers, so-called troops, when you have the largest military power in the former East Bloc next to Russia, still with 40,000 troops present, and no clear determination about the withdrawal of those Serbian military and paramilitary forces. So we're very, very concerned.
And why give such deference to Russia? We know the Serbs came out of the Ukraine in the year 600 AD, and Russia has always stood by them, whether they're wrong or right, and there's a conflict of interest there with the Russians.
Okay, so people could say there's a conflict of interest coming our way too. You know, a famous Canadian writer, Farley Mowat, and I don't know if you know the name Farley Mowat, he actually got banned from the United States for pointing a .22 rifle at a B-52 flying over top of Newfoundland one time.
That I didn't know.
And he was banned from the United States on this, and maybe you can go back and get the ban released. But Farley wrote a book called The Farfarers. Farfarers, it's his last book out. And in the book, which was written a year ago, he talks about the Albanians and the natural and the indigenous people and so on. And he goes right back to 2000 BC and traces people through where they came from and the island of Elba and all the rest of this kind of thing.
That's excellent.
And people that sort of want to see that this is not new. It's been around for a long time. And that it was the Albas, he calls it, which is where Albania and everything came from, that were the indigenous people. They were the native people, and this land claim thing is what it's about. And thank you for coming and telling me that it's the gold mines, that it's the coal mines, and it's the land. Because that's what people have always gone for, is land, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And that's what you want the land all for your own.
And then they want to ethically cleanse the people they don't want, and that's what's going on here.
Right.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Get hold of,
Thank
if
you.
you would like to participate in this and help out on the side of the Kosovo refugees, the Albanian refugees, 876-2313. Dr. Mel Dilley, you can get hold of him. I know he will be pleased to hear from you. And if you want to send them some money, give that number a call and let them know what you like to do, how to do it, and where to go. Thank you. Thank you.